After years of silence surrounding one of music's most private legends, a voice has finally stepped into the spotlight, and it's coming from someone who knows D'Angelo better than anyone else ever could. Imani Archer, the daughter the world barely knew existed, is speaking out, and what she's revealing about her father's hidden life, his struggles, and his legacy has fans stunned. From unspoken truths about fame to deep family pain, this isn't just another celebrity story. It's a revelation that could change everything you thought you knew about D'Angelo. But wait until you hear the part that the industry never wanted to come out. For decades, D'Angelo has been one of music's most mysterious figures. Known for his soulful sound, intense privacy, and long disappearances from the public eye, he built a career defined as much by his silence as by his genius. Fans have always wondered what really goes on behind the curtain of his life, what shaped his struggles, his heartbreaks, and his brilliance. But now, for the first time, someone from within his own family is breaking that silence. Her name is Imani Archer, D'Angelo's daughter. For years, her existence was barely discussed publicly. She grew up in the background of her father's fame, watching from the shadows as the world praised his music, but never truly understood the man behind it. And now, as she steps forward to speak her truth, people are realizing that her story might hold the key to understanding D'Angelo's complex legacy. In this video, we're going to explore who Imani Archer really is, not just as D'Angelo's daughter, but as a woman carving out her own identity in a world that only knows her father's name. We'll uncover what she's revealed about her life growing up, the emotional distance between her and her father, and how fame, pain, and legacy collide in ways that few could imagine. You won't believe what Imani has shared about the real cost of fame, the family secrets that shaped her childhood, and the truths she says the industry tried to bury. Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you'll see D'Angelo and his story in a completely different light. Now let's begin with the first part of this journey, how Imani Archer came to be known, and what her early life reveals about the hidden world behind D'Angelo's fame. For years, very few people even knew that D'Angelo had a daughter. While the world was mesmerized by his voice, his artistry, and his reclusive nature, the story of Imani Archer remained tucked away, far from the spotlight. Born to one of the most enigmatic artists of the modern era, Imani's childhood was anything but ordinary. Yet it wasn't filled with the glamour or privilege that people might expect from the daughter of a music icon. Instead, her life was shaped by silence, distance, and a complex family dynamic that few ever understood. Those who have followed D'Angelo's journey know that he has always been intensely private. Even at the height of his success in the late 1990s and early 2000s, he refused interviews, shunned fame, and withdrew from public life for years at a time. Behind the scenes, he was battling personal demons, from the pressures of the music industry to the weight of expectation and the lure of self-destruction. During those years, while fans were waiting for new music, Imani was growing up in the background, witnessing a father who was both a legend and a mystery. Imani's early years were spent mostly out of the public eye. Sources close to the family say she lived a relatively normal life, thanks to her mother's efforts to shield her from the chaos of fame. Still, it was impossible to completely escape the shadow of being D'Angelo's daughter. Even at a young age, she knew her father wasn't just another musician. He was a cultural phenomenon. But what she also knew, perhaps better than anyone else, was the cost that came with that status. Friends of the family have described Imani as curious and introspective, much like her father. But there was always a quiet sadness about her, the kind that comes from growing up with unanswered questions. While D'Angelo was grappling with fame and battling personal struggles, Imani was learning what it meant to live without the full presence of a father. She would later reveal that there were long stretches of time when communication was limited, and that the distance between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Despite that, Imani has never spoken with bitterness. Instead, her tone when she speaks about her father is one of empathy and understanding. She acknowledges his struggles and recognizes that fame for him was never a blessing, but a burden. In a rare moment of vulnerability, she reportedly said that she believes her father's greatest challenge wasn't music, but finding peace within himself. As she grew older, Imani began to see the duality of her life more clearly. On one hand, she had a father whose art touched millions and influenced an entire generation of musicians. On the other, she had a man she barely knew, someone she loved deeply but understood very little about. That emotional tug-of-war became the defining theme of her early years. Even as a young adult, Imani stayed out of the limelight. She rarely posted about her father, never exploited her connection to his fame, and seemed determined to create her own path. But what people didn't know was that she had been quietly collecting her thoughts, her experiences, her pain, and her perspective on what it truly means to be the child of a legend who never wanted the spotlight. It wasn't until recently that Imani decided to step forward and share her truth. And when she did, the world began to listen, because for the first time, someone was speaking from inside D'Angelo's world. Not as a critic, not as a fan, but as a daughter who lived it. But before we get to her powerful words and what she revealed about her father's struggles, it's important to understand what drove her to finally break her silence, and why. Now, after years of protecting her privacy, she chose to speak. For years, Imani Archer remained silent, watching the world speak about her father while she quietly lived her life outside of the spotlight. But as she grew older, the weight of silence began to press harder. Everywhere she turned, D'Angelo's name carried stories of genius, heartbreak, addiction, and mystery. To the public, he was a legend. To Imani, he was a ghost, a father she loved but could never quite reach. And after years of holding back, that silence finally became too heavy to carry. Those close to Imani describe her decision to speak out as something that built up slowly, not from anger, but from a need for clarity and peace. For most of her life, she'd watched her father be misunderstood by the media. They called him reclusive, troubled, even a fallen star. But Imani knew there was more to the story. She had seen the man behind the myth, the quiet, emotional soul who carried deep pain beneath his talent. She wanted the world to see that version of her father, the one hidden behind the headlines and rumors. Still, it wasn't just about defending him. It was also about reclaiming her own identity. Imagine growing up with a name that instantly connects you to greatness, but also to tragedy. No matter where she went or what she pursued, Imani was always seen as D'Angelo's daughter. That label followed her through school, into her young adulthood, and even into her career. And while she respected her father's legacy, she also wanted to be seen for who she was, her own person, with her own story to tell. The turning point came when she began receiving messages online, from fans, from bloggers, even from strangers, asking her about her father. Some were kind, some invasive, and others cruel. The rumors about D'Angelo's personal life, his mental health, and his long absences were spreading again. People wanted answers, and they assumed Imani had them. For a long time, she ignored the noise. But one particular message changed everything. It came from a fan who wrote that D'Angelo abandoned his daughter for fame. And that comment hit deep. That accusation, though based on speculation, stirred something in Imani. She had lived that reality, the absence, the confusion, the emotional distance. But she also knew that her father's absence wasn't about neglect or lack of love. It was about a man fighting his own demons in an industry that consumes the soul. And she realized that if she didn't speak, others would continue to define her story for her. That was the moment she decided to step forward. Her first public comments came during an intimate online interview. There were no flashing lights, no scripted lines, just raw honesty. Imani spoke with quiet strength, describing her childhood not as a tragedy, but as a journey of understanding. She explained that her father's struggles weren't the result of arrogance or fame gone wrong, but of deep emotional wounds that the world never allowed him to heal. "My father loved deeply," she said, "but the world loved him in a way that hurt him." That single sentence spread across social media like wildfire. Fans who had once judged D'Angelo began to pause. For the first time, they were hearing from someone who wasn't speculating, someone who had lived through it. Imani wasn't defending her father blindly. She was offering context, humanizing a man who had been turned into a myth. And in doing so, she began to heal a part of herself too. But Imani's decision to speak wasn't just about revealing family truths. It was also about reclaiming the narrative. She wanted to show that being D'Angelo's daughter wasn't a burden. It was a lesson. Through her words, she expressed how fame can break families apart, how talent can isolate rather than unite, and how the children of legends often carry emotional scars the public never sees. Her courage to speak also opened doors for other celebrity children who struggle with similar experiences. Many reached out privately, sharing how her honesty made them feel seen for the first time. Imani's story was resonating far beyond the D'Angelo fan base. It was touching anyone who had ever loved someone who couldn't love themselves fully in return. Still, not everyone reacted positively. Some critics accused her of trying to capitalize on her father's name. Others questioned her motives. But Imani remained calm through the backlash. She explained that she didn't speak out to gain attention or sympathy. She did it to find closure. Her words weren't meant to expose, they were meant to heal. "Sometimes the truth," she said, "isn't about secrets. It's about understanding why people hurt the way they do." That message struck a chord with countless viewers. Suddenly, the internet wasn't just talking about D'Angelo the artist. It was talking about D'Angelo the man, the father, the fragile soul behind the fame. Imani's voice had done something powerful. It shifted the narrative from scandal to empathy. But her revelations didn't stop there. As her story gained attention, people began asking the question that had been whispered for years. What really caused D'Angelo to disappear from the spotlight for so long? And did Imani finally reveal what happened during those missing years? When the world first noticed D'Angelo's absence from the spotlight, it sparked a wave of confusion and curiosity. Here was a man who had once been hailed as the savior of soul music, a voice so pure, so magnetic, that it seemed impossible for him to simply vanish. After the success of his legendary album Voodoo, fans expected more music, more tours, more of his signature presence. But instead, D'Angelo disappeared. No interviews, no performances, no explanations. For years, there was nothing but silence. Behind that silence, though, was a storm. And according to Imani Archer, those years weren't about mystery. They were about survival. In her heartfelt reflections, Imani opened up about what it was like to witness her father's quiet collapse. Not as a superstar, but as a man struggling to breathe under the weight of fame. She described those years as a blur of distance, where phone calls were rare, visits unpredictable, and conversations often cut short by exhaustion or sadness. Imani revealed that growing up, she didn't fully understand what was happening. She saw flashes of her father's brilliance when he was home, his laughter, his passion for music, the tenderness in the way he talked to her about life. But then, without warning, he'd be gone again, retreating into isolation. To a young child, that absence felt personal. But as she grew older, she began to realize it wasn't her he was running from. It was the world. She explained that after Voodoo, D'Angelo felt trapped in an image he never asked for. Fans didn't just want his voice, they wanted his body, his mystique. his sex appeal. The untitled "How Does It Feel" video had turned him into an icon of desire overnight. What people saw as art, he experienced as exploitation. The constant sexualization, the pressure to maintain that image, and the unrealistic expectations crushed his spirit. He didn't want to be a fantasy, Imani said softly in one interview. He just wanted to be human. According to Imani, that period marked the beginning of her father's downward spiral. The fame that once lifted him began to consume him. He withdrew from friends, distanced himself from family, and became increasingly reclusive. Music, the thing that once gave him joy, became a source of pain. Each time he tried to create, the pressure to top his last masterpiece weighed him down. Critics called his silence artistic perfectionism, but Imani described it differently. It wasn't perfectionism, she said. It was fear. He was afraid he lost himself to the image people built for him. She spoke about visiting him during those difficult years, and how she could sense his inner battle. There were moments when he seemed almost like his old self, gentle, funny, and deeply reflective. He'd tell her about his love for old soul records, about the musicians who inspired him, and about his dream of making music that healed people. But then there were other moments when he seemed far away, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. He'd stare out the window for hours. Imani said, "It was like he was somewhere else, fighting something I couldn't see." As his career faded from the public eye, rumors began to swirl. Some claimed he'd gone off the grid. Others said he was battling addiction. But very few knew the full story. Imani confirmed that her father had indeed struggled with substance abuse, but not in the way tabloids painted it. She explained that his addiction wasn't about partying or recklessness, it was about pain. He was trying to quiet the noise, she said. Fame had become too loud. Everyone wanted a piece of him, and he didn't know how to protect what was left. Those years of silence were his form of resistance, a way to reclaim control over his identity. But while the world saw a man hiding from fame, Imani saw a father trying to heal himself. She recalled moments when he'd sit with his guitar in the middle of the night, playing soft melodies not meant for an audience. He wasn't performing, she said. He was remembering who he was before the world got too big. For Imani, those silent years were a painful balancing act. On one hand, she admired her father's courage to step away from an industry that demanded his soul. On the other, she longed for connection, to know him beyond the fragments fame left behind. She spoke about missing birthdays, unanswered calls, and long periods of uncertainty. Yet through it all, she never stopped believing in his love. Even when he wasn't there physically, she said, I felt him. I knew he was fighting to come back, not just to music, but to life. When D'Angelo eventually re-emerged years later with his album Black Messiah, Imani described it as a moment of rebirth, not just for him, but for their relationship too. That album was his way of speaking again, she said. Every lyric, every note, it was him reclaiming his voice. She remembered being in the studio, watching him record and seeing a spark that had been missing for years. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about truth. But even with his return, the scars of those silent years never fully faded. Imani admitted that while they found peace in some moments, there were still things left unsaid, apologies that came too late, questions that had no answers. Yet she didn't hold bitterness. Instead, she learned to see her father's journey as a lesson in humanity. People think being a legend means being perfect, she said. But legends are just people who break and still find a way to shine. Her insight offered fans something they had never heard before, a glimpse into D'Angelo's life, not as a headline, but as a human story. Through Imani's words, we saw the man behind the mystery, the father behind the fame, and the soul behind the silence. Her honesty didn't just explain his disappearance. It helped the world understand why sometimes walking away is the only way to survive. But as powerful as her reflections were, Imani also revealed that her father's struggles left behind a legacy of emotional truth, one that continues to shape her own path today. And what she shared next took everyone by surprise. In the next section, we'll uncover how D'Angelo's pain inspired Imani to follow in his footsteps, not as a singer trapped in fame, but as a woman determined to turn generational pain into purpose.